What is up, everyone? I am Jamie with Three Little Goats Homestead, and today I need to get some stuff done that I've been putting off. Today we are going to render down some beef tallow. So beef tallow is a pretty big part of a lot of the stuff that I make. I put it in my soaps, I put it in my creams, I put it in some of my different balms. So I go through a lot of beef tallow, and it's really expensive to buy tallow that's already been rendered. So we do it ourselves here, and thankfully we raise cattle, so we always have beef fat on hand. So let's get started. I'm actually in the shop today because that's where I do the first render of our beef tallow. We live in a very small house, so if I render beef tallow for the first time in the house, it smells like beef for like a week. So I try to do it as much out here. Now I actually use a big roaster to do my beef tallow. If you don't have a roaster, you can do it on the stovetop in a pot. You could also do it in a crock pot. I just prefer my roaster because I can fit a lot in here at once. So when we get our beef back from the butcher, they package all of the fat up like this. Sometimes we'll get smaller packages, sometimes we'll get big giant packages, and it all really depends on the butcher that you go to or the butcher where you get your beef. Now if you're not butchering your own cattle and you don't have your own beef fat to render down, you can easily find it at your local butcher shops. Ask around to local farmers. They may sell you some or even give you some of the fat because a lot of people don't use it. Now because I don't have great planning skills, my fat is still very much frozen, but that's okay because I'm going to let this take its time so I don't have to deal with it right away. So I'm literally just going to throw it all into my roasting pan, and so once I get it all in there, I'll bring it back. All right, so I've got all of my fat in my roasting pan, so I'm going to set this kind of on medium for right now, and I'm going to put a lid on it, and I'm going to let it just do its thing. So some people say to grind down your fat to make this process go a little bit quicker. One, like I mentioned, not great at planning things. Two, the idea of cleaning a grinder that I have ground fat through just does not sound like a fun time for me. So I don't want to do it, so I don't do it. I'll actually come back in here once everything is kind of softened up, and I'll come on with just some kitchen shears and I will cut up the pieces into smaller bits. And I'll even do another render on bigger pieces, but you'll see that later. And I also, because we have a very persnickety septic tank, I try not to put any extra fats and stuff down or drain if I don't have to. So I am doing what's called a dry render. I'm not adding any water, I'm not adding any salt, I'm just going to let it render like this. There are pros and cons to both dry rendering and wet rendering, which I will have a link down in the description box of what the difference between the two are and the pros and cons of each. So if you want to check that out, you're more than welcome to. But for now, I'm going to let this stuff just kind of cook down, and I'll bring you back in a little bit. Hopefully the fan running isn't too noisy, but here is what we're sitting at after a few hours, and that is hot. So what I'm going to do, like I said, because I don't do any type of grounding of it first, I'm just going to take my kitchen shears and I'm just going to go through very carefully so I don't burn myself and cut up any of these bigger pieces. Now, if you remember to actually defrost your fat before you do this or start this process, you can cut it up with a knife or scissors before you put it in to render down. It's up to you, but like for me, because I usually just start rendering fat whenever I literally have time to do it, I find this works for me. And if I leave some big pieces behind, that's fine. I'll just throw them in to the next batch because this will not be my only fat that I render down over the next few days. But it's the only one I'm going to be recording because it takes a lot of time. So I'm going to continue to chop this up, and I'll bring you guys back when we're ready to start draining this stuff off. All right, y'all. So This has been rendering down for a few hours. There's some pieces that probably could give a little bit more fat if I waited, but it's getting late in the day and I need to get this done. The way that I prefer to do it is I've got my bowl, I've got a fine mesh sieve right here, and then I'm actually going to take paper towel. You can use cheesecloth, but cheesecloth gets messy and it gets expensive if you don't want to clean it in between uses, and I really don't want to clean cheesecloth that's been soaked in fat because, well, like I've mentioned in other videos, we have a very cranky septic tank, so I try not to aggravate it. So with these I can actually save the paper towels and we'll use them as fire starters. So I'm just going to start straining this off until we get as much of the fat out that's in here, and then I'll use my spider to get the rest of the big chunks out and put them in a separate bowl. And then it'll be almost ready to start the next step. Alright, so this bowl is about full. I'm going to put my strainer over here. I'm going to go ahead and move this to the fridge so it can start to solidify, and then I will get back to straining the rest of this fat. Alright, so this is all that is left, and this won't even go to waste. The chickens are going to love this little snack. So once my tallow is done hardening up, I'll bring you guys back. Alright y'all, so it is the next day and we have got all of our first rendering done. I do suspect that this one right here is going to have more impurities than the rest of these guys, because this was literally the bottom of the barrel with all the little crumbs and bits and bobs in it. So let's crack these open and see what we're working with. All right, so this is the last bit, the one that I suspect has the most contaminants in it. So we're going to pop this out onto the cutting board. And yes, there's a lot of goo. So let's get some paper towels. I'm gonna scrape all this stuff off before I cut it open, because it just makes it a little easier to do so. I mean, if this is the worst of it out of all of them, I will be very happy. All right, so I got most of the outside gunk. So let's cut this open, see what we're working with. So this is the inside. I can't really push into it, which tells me there is not a whole lot of moisture in here, which makes me very happy. So hopefully I can get away with just doing one more render, because if there's a lot of moisture, we're gonna have to render this a lot more times, which I don't like to do. One, because it takes time, and two, it kind of ruins the integrity of the beef tallow. So I'm going to start by getting these into my pot, and I do my second renders in the house because it doesn't smell quite as beefy as the first renders do. So I'm going to get these moved to start melting and we'll work on them. All right, so my fat has been rendering down, and I keep it on about medium, low medium, just make sure any extra moisture really does get kicked out of there. So again, I've got my bowl, just like our first render. I've got my fine mesh sieve, you know what it's called, and some paper towels, and I'm just gonna start ladling this in without making a giant mess. So I'm gonna get this all put into the bowls. Now I did wash and dry all of these bowls really, really well. Last thing I'm gonna do is render this and then put it in a wet bowl. Kind of defeats all the purpose. So let me get this done and I'll bring you guys back. Bowls of second rendered beef tallow. So these are going to go into the refrigerator, and when they're hardened, I'll bring you guys back again. All right, y'all. So we've got our tallow that has gone through its second render. So let's get it out of the containers and see what it's looking like. My handy dandy wedge, because gonna pop this guy out. All right, so, all right, looking nice and clean, just the way I like to see it. So let's cut her open. She breaks apart just like I like. All right, shouldn't be any moisture in this guy because there wasn't a whole lot to begin with, but nice and hard. And so I think we are ready to start storing this. So let me grab my bucket. The way I store my beef tallow is in basically these 3-gallon food grade buckets I get online. You can melt this back down and put it in mason jars if you'd like, but I have found it's really hard to get back out of mason jars once it solidifies in there. So I just cut it up into usable pieces for me, and I store it in these airtight containers. Something tells me I'm going to need another 3-gallon bucket. All right. Onto the AC just kicked on, so hopefully it's not too loud. It probably is, but again, are nice and clean. I'm There's a little bit of schmutz. Grab the paper towel. Just get those last little bits off. Alright, let's break her open. Again, cracked open, just like I like to see. And I cannot push this in. And it's quite warm today, so even with the heat of bringing this in, it hasn't melted, so it's still really hard. So let's get this nice and chopped up too. This is the last one. Let's get it popped open. And she's looking so fresh and so clean too. Just a few impurities. Now, if you're on your second render and it comes out and you still have a bunch of gunk in there, or you break it open and you find that it still has a little bit of moisture in there, it is no big deal. It is perfectly normal. Go ahead and just do another render. Again, nice and dry. And I'm gonna need a bigger bucket, so but I'll get this chopped up and I'll get another bucket here shortly. All right, y'all, so I ended up with a lot of tallow. So these are 3-gallon buckets and they are both very much full and they will get used up probably by the end of this week. So I will be starting this process all over again next week. So again, I have mentioned there are different ways to render tallow. You can do the wet method or the dry method. Because I use this for cosmetic purposes, I do prefer the dry rendering method, but I do have a blog post going over both methods and the difference in the pros and cons that I will link down below that you can check out. And if you want to see how I use all of this gorgeous tallow, I do have a few videos already out. We use it in our anti-itch sticks, we use it in our deodorants, and of course I use it in my all the fat magnesium cream as well. So if you like this video, be sure to give it a big thumbs up, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. We put out new videos every single week, and if you have any questions or you want to see something specific, as always, leave it down in the comments down below, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.